And so that brings me to Anna Clark, who is our speaker today. Anna was a 2017 Knight Wallace Fellow, which is special to me because she was part of my first class as director of the fellowship. She is now a journalist for ProPublica, which if you had suggested that to her when she arrived for the fellowship, as she will tell you, when she arrived to the fellowship, she had never worked in a formal newsroom. And
That's true.
it is true. I don't say things that aren't true.
Like, not at all.
She lives in Detroit and covers issues in the Midwest. She came to ProPublica after many years working as an independent journalist with a particular interest in how cities are made and unmade. She's the author of this fine book, which we have for you here, being sold by our local neighborhood bookseller, Book Suite. It is called The Poisoned City, Flint's Water, and the American Urban Tragedy. It's a gorgeous book, and I'd like to think that the fellowship plays some small role in her finishing the book. This book was the winner of the Hillman Prize for Book Journalism, the Rachel Carson Environmental Book Award. It was a finalist for the Helen Bernstein Book Award, and it was longlisted for the Andrew Carnegie Medal. Anna's reporting has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Elle. One of my first interactions with becoming a real fan of Anna's work was through a piece she did for Elle magazine on thousands of untested rape kits in Detroit. And her reporting for Elle really brought about change in the system. She's written for the New Republic, Columbia Journalism Review, the Detroit Free Press, and Belt Magazine, among many other publications. She's currently a nonfiction faculty member at Alma College's MFA program in creative writing. I know you would not want me to not say that. Okay, well, you will say hello to them. So Anna's here to talk about a national issue, but we asked her to come here because this issue actually involves Michigan quite directly. If you look at the programs that you have, we titled this talk, Government Secrecy from Flint to Oxford. And Anna's book on Flint, many of you hopefully have interacted with. My idea for what I wanted to ask her to talk about today came from a story that she wrote for ProPublica that was published on May 14th of this year. And it was about the families of the students that were killed in Oxford, Michigan, and the fact that they were still waiting for an official report on what happened that terrible day. I'll just read a couple of paragraphs from the story that really caught my attention. In journalism stories, there are paragraphs that we call nut graphs. Sort of there may be an anecdotal lead, and then there are a couple of paragraphs that sort of bring everything together and tell you why you should continue reading or watching, listening, what the story is about. In this May 14th story, this is what stopped me. After the shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida in February 2018, a state commission delivered a preliminary report 322 days later, reaching the community before the first anniversary. In Newtown, Connecticut, the local state's attorney issued a report 346 days after the shooting. At Sandy Hook Elementary School in 2012. After a 2007 shooting at Virginia Tech, a state panel's report arrived in 136 days. In Oxford, it's been more than 525 days and counting. And that story was published on May 14th. And I thought that was something that we should come here and talk about. These Hovey lectures, of course, are about the work that our journalists do and the important work that journalists do in communities around the country and world. But they're also a chance for us to talk with our community here in Ann Arbor. And so to talk about transparency, why it's important, and what is and isn't happening here in Michigan, it is my very just dear pleasure to welcome Anna Clark.
Hi, everyone. How's it going? Okay, cool. Thank you, Lynette. Thank you to Wallace House and to the university, and thank you to Book Suite. And thank you, everyone, for being here. I truly could not be more honored. I have a distinct memory of sitting in these very same white chairs at the Hovey lecture at the beginning of our year. And I remember that I didn't yet know the stories of the other fellows I was with. I didn't know where they came from truly and deeply yet. But I could feel how every one of us was here because we were ready for a change. And that creates such an electric energy. It is so tender and open. So, to the new fellows, I wish you a year of both restoration and abundance. You truly deserve this time. As you got a little bit of the story of so far, the Knight Wallace year was really very special to me. I arrived as a highly burned out, very low income freelancer. I'd only recently learned that I'd have a chance to write this book about Flint, and I was determined to not let the book take away from the fullness of the fellowship experience or the fellowship to take away from the book. So I tried to have it both ways. I took classes that, grounded me more in the issues behind what happened in Flint. So that included law school classes on water policy and environmental justice, and an urban planning class on metropolitan structures. But I also took a class on pre-World War blues music, just for fun. I dove into the archives that were suddenly available to me with a university email address and the immense resources on campus, including the library at U of M's Flint campus. And if Ann Arbor isn't enough for you, remember you have 2 other campuses. So this was amazing. As a self-employed freelancer, I never had access to anything like that, and it was a huge help for the book. So also that year, I got a lot of sleep. I read short stories. I went to movies at the Michigan Theater on weekdays. I had lots of dinners out at restaurants with new friends. We took some trips to Brazil and South Korea, and this gave me a new context to look back at what I was and reflect differently on what I was learning about cities in the United States, and water and concentrated poverty and the history that we have here. And also during that year, I had days where for the first time in a long time, maybe ever in my adult life, I did nothing in particular. So that is one of my biggest tips for the new fellows, which is don't overcommit yourself. Keep some open space in your schedule so you have time to do whatever you feel like. I know it isn't easy. It's really exciting. There's a lot here. And when the work we do feels like our vocation, when we see the urgent plight of around the world for journalism, for justice, for democracy, it can be so hard to let go and not be quote unquote productive. But when I think back to some of the most valuable experiences I had that year, it wasn't just about the time to learn and think, though it was definitely that. It was also about, these early morning runs that a friend in the program and I went on in Getty's Park, in the over the winter, and playing hide and seek in Wallace House with the children in our community. I mean, experiences like that really refilled my well, and I truly do not know how I would have kept going with the Flint book or have been ready for the role that I now have with ProPublica without that. So that is my love letter to Knight Wallace. Let's get into the big stuff, huh? So I'm here to talk about government secrecy, freedom of information, and the public's right to know. In full disclosure, it's a joke. Pause for laughter. Thank you. So I'm not a scholar of the Freedom of Information Act. I'm not an expert on disclosure policies in Michigan or anywhere else in the United States. But I can speak to you as a practitioner, as a reporter who relies on public records to tell true stories grounded in fact. and as a person who has a foundational belief that democracy and the common good depends on transparency. Democracy dies in darkness, right? It's true. What can seem sometimes like small bore bureaucratic battles over this or that record often has extremely high stakes, maybe even life and death stakes. People in Flint and Oxford, two very different Michigan communities that both experienced crises, know this all too well. Do we have folks here from Flint and Oxford? Hi, folks. Hey, y'all. Okay. So I'm aware I'm talking to a lot of journalists and public university employees, so I suspect that you might have more than usual familiarity with some of these issues, but just in case, I want to give some background. So in the 1960s and 70s, federal and state governments passed laws requiring them to give full or partial access to their records to almost anyone who asked for them. So this is the Freedom of Information Act, often called FOIA, and its kin, so similar laws that may go by different names. I'm speaking about all this very broadly here today. There are exceptions to the Freedom of Information Act, so the government is not going to give you classified documents, no matter how nicely you ask, for example, and they're not going to give you somebody's private medical records, and so forth. But altogether, FOIA was a radical step towards transparency and public accountability. We have the right to information from our government. You and I both. And in Michigan, unlike a couple of other states I know of, you don't have to live here to make the request. We don't have to justify our request for information with any reason. We typically have the presumption of open access. So that is, unless records fall into one of the specifically stated exemptions in the law, you have a right to it. We can use the records any way we like. If our requests are ignored or denied or unreasonably delayed, we can appeal, and even, if needed, we can sue. And when we win that lawsuit, probably the other guys are going to pay for it. So pretty cool, right? I mean, this stuff is the architecture of democracy. It is the brass tacks of justice, especially with the rise of authoritarianism in all corners of the world. We cannot take it for granted. Sunshine, as they say, is the best disinfectant. Not only is transparency a check on leaders and policies that are not serving the public interest, but it's also a powerful tool when leaders and policies are working well. It makes their work more visible, more legible to the people they serve. However, not all FOIA laws are created equal. So your access to public information is more expansive in some states than in others. And I'm sorry to say that Michigan is on the wrong side of that in many ways. I love this state dearly. It is wild, gorgeous, strange, challenging, and altogether amazing place to be a journalist. But it's also a place where secrecy runs deep, which is why we need more journalists here. So let me give you a few facts about transparency law in Michigan, and then I'll share some stories about what this looks like on the ground. Michigan is one of only 2 states in the nation where both the legislature and the executive branches are exempt from public record requests. Does anybody know the other state? It's Massachusetts. Oh, I got it. So, I know. In our state, open records laws apply to cities, they apply to school districts, they apply to police departments, and to universities like this one, but the law does not apply to the legislators or the governor or their staff. U of M's groundskeeping crew has more duty to transparency than state representatives, senators, or our governor. Here's another fact. In Michigan, no independent entity monitors the use of public access laws to ensure that they are fair and effective. In contrast, some states have an appeal board or an ombudsman that serves in such a role. Another fact, in Michigan, people who are incarcerated are denied the right to public records, full stop. This restriction was added to the law in 1994, our mass incarceration era, and it's very blunt. It's like right at the top, Section 1, Part 2. In Michigan, as in many other places, delays are a problem. So the law requires a response to a FOIA request within 15 business days with a possible extension. But there's no serious penalty for missing the deadline, and in practice, a 1 to 3 month wait is not uncommon or longer. A ProPublica colleague of mine and I, we sent a request to a local agency in Michigan in February 2022 and paid a deposit for it. It was a specific tailored request, but we didn't get the records until last month. So delays like this mean that critical information about our communities isn't reported until much later, in some cases too late to make a difference. Money is another barrier. So sometimes you receive records for free, especially if your request is made in the public interest, as it is with a lot of us reporters, compared to, say, the commercial purposes of a real estate lawyer. Sometimes there's a fee for to receive the records. And to be fair, fees can sometimes be reasonable. It takes real time and effort for our public officials to respond to these requests. Sometimes they have an enormous number of them coming every day. FOIA coordinators are often under-resourced. They have requests piling up. Many of them can be overly broad or vague, redundant, excessive, even harassing, and they clog up the pipeline for the rest of us. So in my opinion, public interest requests should be free, I feel. But in general, a reasonable FOIA fee can sometimes be a useful check on poorly framed or bad faith requests, and it can also help ease the burden and cost for our public workers. But at the same time, government agencies do sometimes put an exorbitant and unreasonable fee on public information. So it can cost in the thousands of dollars, even tens of thousands of dollars. And in case you haven't heard, the journalism industry is not exactly flush with cash right now. So reporters worry. I mean, what information are we missing because we had to shrink down the scope of our request or abandon it altogether just to keep costs down? Also, compliance can be spotty, especially at the local level. So I'm not sure if they still do this, but Michigan State's journalism program, they used to teach students about FOIA with this interesting exercise. They divided up Michigan's 83 counties, and they sent a request to the road commission in each one, asking how much salt did they put on the road the previous winter. So this number is a simple line item, but the responses were all over the place. So some would give students a straight answer. Some asked why they needed to know. Some told them the students they'd share the information, but only if they paid money. Some bluntly said they were not going to respond to the request. And some counties just never responded at all over the place. And then, you know, what can you meaningfully do about it? It's tricky. So we have some issues with making public information public here. And Michigan isn't alone, to be fair. There is one case from Texas that I read about in a Northwestern Law Review. So this was around the time, it was shortly after Hurricane Harvey affected the city. And a New York Times reporter who was covering it sent a FOIA request to the city of Houston asking for their after action report, which is a very standard report that describes, you know, what happened, how the city responded to it, what could have been better, you know, just a pretty usual thing. But Houston denied her request, citing a FOIA exemption for records relating to terrorism and other criminal activity. The reporter appealed, making the very good point that a hurricane is neither terrorism nor criminal activity. But the city lawyers denied her again. So the Times is in this, is at a decision point, right? They can sue the city for them not complying with FOIA, and they'd probably win, but it would cost the paper maybe like $20,000, and it'd take who knows how many months, maybe years, to even get to the end of it. And even though this is coming from one of the richest journalism outlets in the country, they can only afford to do so many of the FOIA lawsuits, you know, and a lot of outlets, as we know, can't afford to do any. So the Times was in this position of like, they have to decide if it's worth it. And they don't even know, of course, what's in the report. So what is it even going to be a meaningful story, especially if you don't get it for months and months and months, So all this is like very prohibitive, I think, on public information. It makes me think of something that the essayist and short story writer Charles D'Ambrosio once said. Sometimes the problem with the story is the story. This brings me to Flint. So I don't think it is too much to say that the limits on public access to public information made the Flint water crisis worse. So state officials, as you may know, had an unusually direct role in a catastrophic water switch and the delayed response to the aftermath. And it was an utterly man-made crisis, and Flint residents, activists, their allies, journalists, all were very interested in records from the state. We wanted to see the emails, the documents that revealed what state officials knew, when they knew it, how they discussed the escalating crisis among themselves, who had influence on the decisions they were making, all of it, right? Now, some of the most illuminating FOIA requests were made to Michigan's environmental agency by an out-of-state scientist back in 2015, so before the state acknowledged the crisis. And he said he spent like $3,000+ on it. Now, Flint activists had been organizing around this stuff since early 2014. Had there not been such a big price tag, could they have gotten the emails themselves much sooner, before the scientists even came onto the scene? Could this have both hastened the recognition and relief that the city needed and spare some portion of its suffering? I wonder. In 2016, the glaring exemption for the governor's office came under fire when Flint's story was beginning to make national and international news. So Governor Rick Snyder was under enormous pressure to release emails from his office that related to Flint and its water. Conservative and liberal leaders alike were demanding it, as did residents, reporters, editorial boards, everyone. In almost everywhere else in the nation, we wouldn't have to make a whole campaign for this. But here, transparency was an at-will gesture for which we had to plead. Finally, the governor's office did post hundreds of emails from 2014 and 2015 online. We could see how staffers were talking about the issue, including emails directly sent to the governor. It gave us a look from the inside, albeit much later than it should have come. And notably, that first batch did not include emails from 2013, the critical year that the state-appointed emergency managers made the decisions to switch the water and go forward with a disastrous treatment plan. So at one point, there was actually a subpoena for those 2013 emails. In most of the country, bringing this information to light is ordinary business. In Michigan, extraordinary measures were being taken. As the spotlight on Flint continued to shine brightly, the 2013 emails and more, were eventually shared online too. At the same time, many of us were acutely aware of this opt-in nature of their release. The governor's office was in control of the material. It could choose what to include, and we feared what not to include. If it turned out that some emails were withheld, there's no penalty. If the publicly available email postings like online aren't maintained, there's nothing really we can do about it. With a conditional approach to transparency established at the top here in Michigan, we've normalized this kind of trust us attitude for public officials, even in the face of crisis. This creates a permission structure for local officials to do the same. I believe that a culture of secrecy is contagious, just as a culture of transparency could be contagious. So as many of you know, there was a deadly shooting in Oxford in 2021 at school. In the weeks before the tragedy, the shooter interacted with school officials a number of times, right up to the morning of the shooting when he met with the school office. There were huge red flags. but officials sent him back to class and even returned his backpack to him without checking it first. That backpack, it turned out, contained the weapons used just 2 hours later when he killed 4 people at the school, injured 7 others, and traumatized an entire community. It's haunting. Now, nearly 2 years later, that shooter has pleaded guilty. His parents are facing an unprecedented trial, but families, quite reasonably, also want answers from the school district, the very same school where many of them are still sending their kids. They want to know what safety policies were in place at the time of the shooting, if any. Were they followed or not followed? How are they enforced? How is the school approaching threat assessment today? Where is this comprehensive accounting of exactly what happened before, during, and after that terrible day? Without such an accounting, the community is left to rely on this drip of revelations from the courts, the fragmented stories they share with one another, and their own hard-earned research. All of this exacerbates the pain they're already going through. So initially, the school officials signaled that they too wanted answers. The elected board, they were all part-time volunteers, voted unanimously for a third-party review to investigate what happened. But as I speak to you today, Lynette gave you kind of a rundown. It's still not out. There's a lot to the story of why that is, but suffice to say, there's no standard protocol for independent investigations following school shootings. So like compare that to like when there's a plane crash, there's this like automatic, immediate, independent investigation to find out what the heck happened, right? Like you want to do that for public safety purposes so you can learn what you need to learn to like make sure it doesn't happen again. And it's also really important for like restoring public trust, right? To make people not terrified to go on a plane again, right? There's a lot of purposes to have some kind of like independent, full accounting of what happened. But I was amazed to find when I started reporting on this, I was kind of like, okay, well, here's what's been going on in Oxford. What usually happens? What's the best practice? What's like the protocol? There's not. Like there's not. Like if these kind of accountings happen at all, it follows tragedies usually where there are especially high body counts, according to one expert I spoke to, and they vary widely in their scope. So this haphazard approach leads to mistrust inside communities, experts say, and wastes an opportunity to extract lessons that could prevent the next tragedy. So today, in Oxford, it's now been 652 days and counting, still waiting for that report. It is expected to be released this fall, but fighting for it has been a long, fraught, and painful journey for many in the community. The Oxford School Board declined multiple early offers from the Attorney General to investigate, and the company that was eventually hired to do the job has gone forth, it seems, pretty vigorously, but they've struggled along the way to get critical witnesses to cooperate with its review, even though those who work for the school have significant immunity protections. Lawyers for both the district and its insurance company caution them against talking. In one public statement, the company doing the review declared that in its experience, quote, the extent of third-party interference of this investigation has been unusually extraordinary. And speaking of like the school insurance, company too, like just while I was working on this story that came out in May, I was curious about how he got introduced, to the school officials. So I submitted a FOIA request to the school district asking for like the email that from the insurance company that like connected him to the school leaders. And I was surprised. I got a very quick response and it was a rejection. And I was surprised to see that the school insurance lawyer was responding to the FOIA requests. I was like, huh. Yeah. And so I went to I was like, well, he denied it like based on attorney-client privilege. And I was like, I don't think that follows because it's just an introductory email. You didn't even send it. And thankfully, like there's this like legal team at ProPublica that could kind of give me the like language, like this case, like this, like this, so I could like send my appeal about, what happened. And I think sometimes if I'd been working on the same story without that, like as a freelancer, would my appeal have been successful? Like, I don't know, because I might not have had those same citations. And even if I could eventually dig them up, it would take longer. And, you can see how there can be this cascading effect. The school board did eventually grant the appeal, but it ended up this one simple email ended up taking like kind of weeks to get because they didn't vote for it until the next board meeting, whatever. Point is, sometimes the problem with the story is the story. The lack of transparency is not just frustrating, it is dangerous. It stunts the ability for reporters and residents to understand the choices made by those who have power over our lives. It delays reform and accountability when those choices go awry. And even when those choices are good or ordinary business, withholding them from public view breeds suspicion and mistrust in our already polarized climate. But here is the good news. Transparency is popular. Who's pro-transparency? Yeah, me too. So besides Michigan's ignoble reputation as one of the only states where our most powerful people have exempted themselves from FOIA, we are also one of only 2 states that doesn't require sitting lawmakers to make any disclosures, none, about their financial interests. Does anybody know what the other state is? Massachusetts. In this case, it was Idaho. Yeah. Okay, this is part of the good news, though. This is about to change. So last November, as part of Proposal 1, which in addition to making some changes to term limits, more than 66% of voters in this swing state voted for it. So we have yet to see what the specifics will be of this disclosure law, our very first, but it would be wise to be watchful for loopholes and such. But Michigan will have its first financial disclosure requirements for politicians in place as it heads into 2024. And also this year, a legislator proposed a bill that would somewhat relax the FOIA restrictions for incarcerated people. It would allow them to receive information about themselves or their minor children if they have not legally been denied parenting time. Over the years, we've seen some other flares of interest in some of this FOIA reform. There have been, proposals to eliminate FOIA fees, reduce wait times, all good. But perhaps most importantly, lawmakers from both parties have proposed to open up the legislature and the governor's office to record requests. When Governor Gretchen Whitmer campaigned in 2018, she released this 10-part plan, the Sunshine Plan, to make state government, quote, more open, transparent, and accountable to Michigan taxpayers. It described expanding FOIA to include her office, the legislature. Bills co-sponsored by Representative Jeremy Moss, a Democrat, and Senator Ed McBroom, a Republican, passed the House multiple times, 3 times unanimously, but it kept dying before the end of the term. It kept running into this final boss of the Senate leadership that at the time reportedly objected to opening up lawmaker communications to the public. A similar bill is on the table right now, though, like the ones that came before it, it would give the legislature some notably different terms for appeals. So the governor would be subject to FOIA. The legislator would be subject to like a similar law to FOIA, but with the major difference that if you were denied a request and you appealed it, instead of being able to take it to court, the appeal would go to this like legislative in-house counsel. Yeah. However, Whitmer does not have to wait for a bill to sign to release records from her administration. She could do it today, voluntarily. And in fact, in 2018, she pledged to do just that, opening her own office to record requests if the legislature did not change the law. She has not done that. And when asked about it, she has said that she believes transparency laws should be equally applied to her office and the legislature. We keep getting, this standstill. Meanwhile, there are groups working to empower people, you and me, to exercise our right to public information. There's, for example, I'm just picking a few off the top of my head. Well, sort of off the top of my, whatever. This is just a few. There's a wonderful group called the Documenters. They have hubs all around the country, including in Detroit and Grand Rapids. It pays residents, just regular folks, to collect and share information from public meetings, and they present them in these really accessible ways. It's a powerful civic service, bringing more transparency to local government. I'd love to see a program like that here in Washtenaw County. Besides reporters on the ground, who I hope you're all supporting with your subscriptions and donations, there are also a lot of organizations, fighting the good fight for systemic public accountability. Wallace House is one of them. And so is the Reporters Committee for the Freedom of the Press. They deployed on a dime to help out that paper in Kansas that was raided by the police recently that many of you, I'm sure, heard about. Also, the Michigan Campaign Finance Network is a nonpartisan nonprofit doing essential work and shining a light on the power brokers in our state with a particular focus on money and politics. The point is, when it all comes down to this, we are truly all in this together. And now, to quote our beloved public radio hosts, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you, everyone.
We're going to have time for questions, and people will be walking around with mics. Before we take the first question, I just want to point out something that may be obvious to some of you. I started by saying that Anna works for ProPublica, which is a national news organization. But Anna is based here in Michigan. She was hired specifically to work in Michigan. And why is that important? Because as our democracy has become untethered over the past several years, one of the causes of that, I think we at Wallace House, we talk with our fellows about this all the time, is the very coastal nature of the journalism industry. As we have lost local, regional, state news, the number of state reporting bureaus that have closed in the United States over the past 15 years as our industry has fallen apart, you can chart a direct line between the loss of local news coverage and people getting on buses to go attack the Capitol. And so when organizations like ProPublica decide that it's important to open up a bureau of ProPublica in Illinois, to hire people in Michigan, when the Marshall Project, which covers criminal justice, decides to hire people that are going to be based in Ohio, this is an important step. I know that it's very easy to turn on your television on any given night and become highly agitated about the state of national news, and to become obsessed with horse races. We are about to move into prime horse race season, and I urge you all to think about the importance of what is happening locally, regionally, in your state. And I did a meeting with the Chamber of Commerce a while ago, and I started by saying, how many of you, and I'll just do it here, pay monthly for Netflix? How many pay for HBO? How many pay for Spotify? Now, this maybe doesn't work in this audience because I think this is a heavy local subscriber audience. How many of you support in some way with some sort of regular, monthly, quarterly, annual payment to a local news organization serving your community here in Michigan? So next year, I want this audience, I want every hand to be up. It is really, really important to our democracy. And so Anna Clark is doing a service for us. And the fact that ProPublica, an organization that has enough resources to have a legal team to support her FOIA work, is doing a service for those parents in Oxford who are still waiting for information. And so with that, we'll open it up to questions. Yes.
Thank you, Anna.
Here's a microphone.
Anna, thank you for the excellent lecture. It's great to see one concentrating on our little piece of flyover territory here. So when Daniel Ellsberg released the Pentagon Papers, he received broad and timely support, not only from the U.S. journalistic community, including huge news outlets, but also broadly around the world. In contrast, when Julian Assange reports on war crimes that our government is committing, there's barely anything there. And I'm wondering why you think there's been that lack, why that support just really hasn't been there for him. To my mind, he's a courageous journalist doing pretty much what Daniel Ellsberg did. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for that question. And rest in peace, Daniel Ellsberg. I think he just passed away a few months ago. But yeah, that was a really historic occasion for sure. And I won't pretend to be like an expert on what precisely happened with or didn't happen with like Julian Assange, but a few things that I think might be, just contextually different. Like one, back in the 70s, like, journalism organizations were much larger. Like the noise they would make would have a larger effect because there's so many more of them, and they carried a lot more weight in a lot of people's lives than I think we have in our more fragmented and much depleted journalistic industry today. So I think I think that's one part of it. And the other part of it, I think, is like, might be some of the complexities of like that particular story, but I can't pretend to know it. So like, I don't know, but I do think, like, I hear you on that, like the idea of like when there is like an instant of like somebody who's like often at great personal cost, like trying to make critical information public and for the purposes of seeking like more justice and more accountability and stopping harm, like I think that is something that does call on all of us to help each other out, like I think we can't let like in any individual institution or individual like carry the full burden of it, because it's too hard. There's been like one thing that's actually been really interesting lately is there has been like this like rising movement for like a lot of journalistic organizations collaborating with each other in different ways. And among other things, I think that helps like create more strength and more stability and safety to put out some of the like sometimes very dangerous information that is coming out in non-traditional ways, or maybe traditional ways, I guess, when you think about it. I'm sorry if that's not a perfect answer, but I don't know the specifics. So, Oh, hi.
Anna, thanks so much. You did so much for Flint, and it's my hometown. And I wondered if you can add to the FOIA piece about Flint to comment on what you know so well, which is the emergency manager law and how it created such an incredible engine of secrecy to make the city of Flint go dark as a functioning democracy, and comment specifically on how the loss of the ombudsman couldn't subpoena the documents, the engineering, so we knew they weren't safely treating the water. City council lost the right to issue subpoenas. I don't know if you were there when they unanimously subpoenaed at the height of the crisis before the emergency, the engineering, and the governor kept that from his own task force 18 months later. And it was all because of the emergency manager law. They invoked executive privilege because they treated the city as being run by one person, not by a city council that was elected. And they lost the ability of the Civil Service Commission to issue its subpoenas. Now, I was on the county prosecutor team. We got all the stuff within 2 weeks. And then we had to go under seal with all of our document production. I know you eventually helped the city of Flint get all of that. My question is, how do we raise up the fact that the emergency manager law, unique in the country, rejected by 57% of the voters, all but 3 counties, really created a deep level of darkness in which this corruption could occur, so that we can repeal the law, because it hasn't been repealed yet, and it's a Democratic House and Senate and a Democratic governor.
Yep. Yeah, this is a big thing. So if folks don't know about it, like what happened is that Michigan, like a lot of places, has had some kind of intervention system for financially distressed cities and school districts, but our system for that notably and significantly expanded some 10 years ago. And it was like, speaking of transparency is popular, it was voted down in a referendum and then restored virtually identically by lawmakers about 6 weeks later. And this was a system that a lot of communities in Michigan were put under over the intervening time, including for 3.5 years, critical years, with Flint. So what this meant is like the state appointed person had total power over the city. Local officials, as he was saying, were disempowered to even get basic information about the workings of the very city they might have been elected to represent. This is, I think basically what it comes down to is just like, this is this idea of like, a culture of secrecy becoming so familiar we mistake it for normal. That just, that I think that's kind of a natural extension of it. We don't have any currently active emergency managers, but as he also mentioned, the law is still on the books, despite a lot of the political leaders in charge having been highly opposed to it during its time. So,
Jake? Oh,
Hi,
sorry.
Anna. Is it on? Thank you so much for this important presentation. You spoke to my online journalism students recently, and so I'm here in person. This was a wonderful presentation. I'm looking forward to sharing it with my students. I was wondering if you would share any advice you have for our next generation of journalists.
it is scary. I don't want to minimize that. It's not like, if you're looking for money and job security, maybe elsewhere. But I and a lot of other people I know, a lot of people who are here right now wouldn't do this if we didn't love it and believe in it and know it matters. And if you are a curious person, if you want to make a difference in like the community, if you want to like give it the gift of like intention and information and knowledge and connection and all this stuff. It is wonderful, amazing work. And I mean, and also we need you, like and everybody who does this work, we truly do need you.
I didn't really have a lot of questions. I just wanted to say thank you for keeping the spotlight up. Thank you, Anna. You did a wonderful job. You crushed it.
Jake.
Very quickly, when it comes to the passing of the baton of power, and the fact that Whitmer and the current Attorney General postured themselves to greater openness, do you feel that it is more politicized for opening the doors, letting in the light? And do you think that we keep getting it wrong because of executive privilege more broadly, like we're seeing with the Death Star bill in Texas, and this overtaking of states' rights argument versus what people tend to run on, even from either side of the aisle? That's all. You did wonderful. Thank you.
I think I'll just say, like, kind of briefly that I think transparency is popular among people, which is perhaps partly why it's also popular among a lot of politicians, especially when they're campaigning. But everybody wants the other guy to go first. You know what I mean? Like that. I think this is what we're kind of seeing. And once a person's in that position themselves, they start being like, like and then I have to worry about this, and then, And I think at some point, like we need real leaders who are just being like, I'm just gonna do it. You should do it too. You know what I mean? And let that be their challenge. Like, so if she's kind of like, which I understand, because I kind of agree. I don't, that the legislature should be open to the same, FOIA law as the governor's office. But what if she did it? What if she did it, kind of called the bluff and be like, now it's your turn, Like I think you can lead by example. But right now we have this like stalemate where the failures of another person or party or whatever, like gives you cover to kind of, not do it either, and at some point, like we get, we've been having these same conversations for literally years. It's like somebody just needs to go, like, let's do it. Let's like actually have the transparency.
Oh, thanks very much for an interesting talk. I'm a fan of the Freedom of Information Act because I've used it to obtain information in a whistleblower retaliation lawsuit against the San Francisco VA. And it's been extremely helpful in that regard. I received hundreds of pages of emails about me between supervisors who were scheming to adjust my schedule in certain ways without informing me about it. So, but one of the obstacles that I discovered was the more requests I submitted, the more resistance I got from the agency. So they started imposing $300 fee to get one email. And there's also the problem of redacting information. So the VA Inspector General sent me a report in response to my request, and 98% of the document, which is about 8 pages long, was whited out and redacted. So I don't know if there are any rules that govern what these FOIA officers are supposed to do. One thing that's really strange is that there are multiple VA offices all over the country, and everyone has a VA officer, a FOIA officer. I don't know if they have standard guidelines. And in Michigan, I don't know if there are any guidelines for when do they redact things, when are they not supposed to do that. Can you speak to that?
I don't want to get too far ahead of my skis because I'm not familiar with the specifics of VA or state of California, like policy with that, with this stuff. But I hear you on that, how I think this could kind of potentially fall under the category of, some of this like kind of compliance stuff. Like if, like there are certain things they're legally allowed to not include if it fits under this, like the named exemptions. If the things they're redacting, don't fall under that, then you have a case. But then you get into the challenge of like, well, I don't know what's under it. Like that's a problem, right? So this is why I think that like it could, outside of like, fighting back like through like court system, this is one reason why I think it could be useful to have these like independent arbiters, like some kind of like not like that, not the people you're appealing to for the FOIA request, but some other agency or ombuds or something like that you can turn to be like, what do I do here? Like how do we work out this dispute we have? I say this email shouldn't be worth $300. They say it is, like, and like how do we, and have them like kind of without you having to pay the burden of like lawyers and stuff like that. So, but yeah, the larger thing, like getting, justice for communities, justice individually. I mean, I think that's like a very powerful story, and thank you for sharing it.
We have time for one more question. Yep.
Great speech, and it's a pleasure being here. It was interesting you brought up the governor, her lack of transparency, because I was just having a conversation recently with someone about that, and their response to me was, "Where did you hear that?" My response to them was, "Do your research." But under the same token, it's a two-way street. Reporters have to be, or the journalists have to be transparent as well. And oftentimes in our society, it seems as if journalism that like a politician, they don't report on them. And that's unfair to the electorate. So it works both ways. So the journalists have to report on the things that politicians say, because she did say during her campaign speech she was going to be transparent. You cannot now say because the other party is not being, or the legislation or the House is not being transparent, I'm not going to be transparent. So you have to walk it like you talk it, and she needs to be transparent.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the idea of like that you're getting at, of like consistency, and that's certainly not just for people of different parties at different levels of government, but yes, for ourselves too, right? And we got to remember this as reporters calling for transparency to to conduct ourselves with integrity as much as possible. Like, a lot of times you'll see in their stories, they really like show their work, in ways that I think are really helpful. Like, here's how I got that information, which is a bit of transparency on like their process. And here's why we're doing this story. I think those kind of like ways of engaging people can kind of demystify our work and our process too in ways, and also can perhaps keep us more in line with the values that we try to espouse when we try to hold others accountable too.
Here. Come on up. So thank you so much for that talk, and thank you to everybody who came out. Several people in the audience, not from Ann Arbor, so thank you for coming to join us. And I hope you'll stay and mingle and speak with Anna and with our new fellows. Every year, we present our Hovey speaker with a token of our appreciation. And so it's my pleasure to present Anna with the Hovey Bowl. Every year somebody asks me, why do we present a bowl? And I don't know. But you can put receipts in here from your FOIA requests.
Check stubs.
Yes. And thank you so much.
Thank you. That's lovely.
The other thing, so when you walk into the front door of Wallace House and you turn to your left, coming in the door, you'll see this plaque hanging here. And this is our 36th Hovey lecture, and Anna's name will be added here to a really fine list of speakers over the years. So thank you all for coming. The fact that you are here every year really says something about our community values. You know, we have talked about sometimes moving this event to another venue, but I actually think it's very special here in the Wallace House Gardens every year. And it signifies what we stand for here in this house. Though it's a lovely house, I say to fellows, you've heard me say this, that the most subversive things happen in this beautiful arts and craft home. And we are here to uphold democracy and to challenge convention and to question ourselves, to think about how we can make our societies better, and to make it easier for journalists like Anna to do the work that she's doing to help protect, safeguard our communities, and to create a more informed and engaged public. So thank you all for being here. Welcome to Wallace House. You are going to have a great year. The bar is open. Thank you.
That was amazing.